By 1912, Britain's most powerful women had reached a breaking point. After decades of failed petitions, Emmeline Pankhurst's movement swapped speeches for sabotage. Over the next 2 years, more than 100 fires ripped through homes, churches, and railways, costing the nation millions and dividing it overnight. How did a campaign for votes become an all-out war on property? The answers begin where the peaceful struggle ended. For more than 40 years, women in Britain lobbied Parliament, signed petitions, and marched through city streets demanding the right to vote. Each time, the answer was the same. Politicians debated, promised reform, and then found reasons to delay. By 1912, not a single bill granting women the vote had passed. The government's pledges, repeated in the House of Commons and reported in the press, dissolved into silence as soon as pressure eased. The patience of the movement's leaders wore thin. Emmeline Pankhurst, her resolve steeled by decades of disappointment, refused to accept more empty words. Alongside her daughter, Christabel, she built the Women's Social and Political Union into a disciplined force, unwilling to settle for another generation of broken promises. The frustration of these years found its voice in a new motto: deeds, not words. This was not just a slogan, it was a warning. In January 1913, Emmeline stood before a crowd in Glasgow and declared that the government had no intention of ever granting women the vote. She took personal responsibility for what would follow. Christabel, operating from exile in Paris to avoid arrest, directed the next phase from afar. The movement's faith in peaceful protest had run out. With every failed bill, the moral line shifted. The question was no longer whether action was justified, but what form it would take. The ground was set for a campaign that would shake Britain's sense of order and force the question back onto the national agenda. Fires broke out in quiet suburbs, on railway sidings, and across the countryside. In 1913 alone, more than 100 separate arson attacks were recorded. That was an average of 2 every week. The campaign left a trail of scorched timber, shattered glass, and gutted buildings from London to the Scottish borders. Insurance companies tallied the damage. By the end of the year, losses reached £380,000, a sum that would top £40 million today. Golf clubhouses, empty mansions, churches, railway stations, and even the stands at major sporting venues were all struck. The pattern was deliberate. Attacks were timed for nights or early mornings when buildings stood empty. Each fire was a message. Property would burn, but lives would not be risked. The scale was unprecedented in Britain's domestic history. Local newspapers filled columns with reports of smoke rising from familiar landmarks. Homeowners and business leaders demanded action as premiums soared and confidence faltered. Behind the numbers lay a clear intent: to disrupt daily life, damage the economy, and force the government to confront a movement that would no longer be ignored. The suffragettes had turned frustration into strategy, and the flames counted out the cost of broken promises. Empty houses stood as frequent targets, chosen for their silence and symbolic weight. Mansions under construction, left vacant at night, became easy marks for fire and smoke. Churches, too, were singled out, not for faith, but for their role as pillars of the establishment. Flames swept through wooden pews and stained glass, leaving only scorched stone behind. Railway stations and signal boxes faced sabotage under cover of darkness. Telegraph wires were cut and signals tampered with, halting trains and disrupting the lifeblood of commerce. Golf courses and sporting pavilions, icons of leisure for the privileged, were set ablaze, their clubhouses gutted in the early hours. The suffragettes' logic was clear. Strike where it hurt, but avoid human cost. Post boxes became a battlefield of their own. Acid and phosphorus slipped through the letter slot, turning mail into ash and forcing the postal service to a crawl. Letter bombs, carefully timed, threatened the safety of those who handled Britain's correspondence. Each act was calculated to spark maximum alarm with minimum loss of life. The goal was not random chaos, but a relentless pressure on the routines and comforts that shielded the powerful from change. By choosing targets that disrupted daily rhythms, yet rarely put lives directly at risk, the campaign forced the question of women's rights into every corner of society, from the breakfast table to the boardroom. Emily Wilding Davison was born in 1872 and raised to value education, earning a place at Oxford at a time when women could not receive degrees. She became a teacher, then left her post behind to dedicate herself to the fight for women's suffrage. By 1911, Davison had invented a new form of protest, setting fire to postboxes, turning the Daily Mail into a battleground for attention. Her commitment was total. She spent months in prison, enduring 8 sentences and being force-fed 49 times during hunger strikes. Each time she emerged, she returned to the campaign with renewed resolve. In February 1913, she planted a bomb at the unfinished home of Chancellor Lloyd George, leaving the building in ruins but harming no one. On June 4, 1913, Davison took her protest to the Epsom Derby. As the King's horse thundered down the track, she slipped under the rail and reached for its bridle, the suffragette flag in her hand. The collision was violent, captured in a newsreel that stunned the nation. She never regained consciousness. 4 days later, her funeral drew 50,000 mourners through London. In silence, they carried her memory forward, a symbol of sacrifice and a question that has never been fully answered. Mary Lee believed that words alone would never rattle Westminster. In 1909, she hurled the first stone at a government building, shattering a window and the illusion that women's anger could be contained. Her arrest set a precedent, but it was only the beginning. Kitty Marion, a former music hall performer, became the movement's most prolific arsonist. She lit the fire that destroyed the grandstand at Hurst Park Racecourse in June 1913, watching from the shadows as flames consumed the symbol of privilege. Marion's campaign left a trail of gutted houses and singed headlines across the country. Edith Rigby, a doctor's wife from Preston, took aim at the Liverpool Cotton Exchange, an engine of British commerce. She planted a pipe bomb in 1913, shaking the heart of the city's trade. Then there was Lillian Lenton, slight and quick-witted, who slipped through police dragnets again and again. Dubbed the tiny wily, elusive Pimpernel, she set fires, endured hunger strikes, and vanished from nursing homes before authorities could return her to prison. Each woman chose her own method: stone, fire, explosives, or escape. But all shared a single purpose: to force the country to confront the cost of denying women a voice. In 1913, Parliament passed a law with a name as clinical as its purpose: the Prisoners' Temporary Discharge for Ill Health Act. The public called it the Cat and Mouse Act. Its logic was simple. When suffragette prisoners grew dangerously weak from hunger strikes, they were released to recover, only to be tracked down and returned to their cells once their health improved. The cycle repeated, turning women into fugitives, never free for long, always under threat of arrest. Inside prison walls, another practice unfolded behind closed doors. Medical officers, under government orders, forced rubber tubes down the throats or through the noses of hunger-striking women. Liquid food was poured in, often as the women struggled or cried out. Prison medical notes from Holloway and Strangeways record bruised faces, damaged throats, and broken teeth. Some women suffered permanent injury. The process was described by its victims as torture, and the press soon echoed their words. Headlines spoke of brutality and shame. Public outrage simmered, but the machinery of the law kept turning. The state insisted it was protecting life, but in doing so, it made martyrs of the women it tried to silence. Militant protest still divides opinion, but its impact is undeniable. The tactics once condemned as terrorism forced change, and they echo in movements worldwide today. As debates on protest and state response intensify, the suffragettes remind us, progress often demands confrontation, not comfort. What lines should a fight for rights never cross?